Hey everyone, this is Matt with the Fundamental Investing Institute. Thank you for tuning in today. This is the second video in a two-part series of talking about debt service and cash flow. So the previous video, we kind of introduced the concept of the debt service coverage ratio, which is our normalized cash flow figure divided by our interest and principal debt payment, right? So to elaborate on that, what I like to see personally is a coverage ratio of 1.5 times. That to me is a conservative figure, but I want my cash flow to cover the debt service 1.5 times. Now, banks will usually go with a lower coverage ratio if they're confident in who's buying the business. The amount of equity they have is certainly going to factor into it, and how confident they are in that cash flow figure and whether that cash flow figure can continue in the future. Now again, because we're using borrowed money, we have to focus on businesses that have historically produced steady cash flow. We expect them to produce steady cash flow in the future. The banks are going to look at that as well. So we're on the same page as the bank because we don't want to take risks that they're not comfortable with. Now I will say, you may have to go to a lot of different banks. Banks say no for a lot of different reasons. They're not all easy to work with. So you should probably plan on going to multiple lenders, but we want to be comfortable with the credit analysis ourselves before we ever go to a bank. Now let's think about a very simple scenario. So I talked about I think I gave a figure in a previous video of a company with $200,000 in true residual cash flow. That was our normalized free cash flow figure. And if we end up paying $1 million for that business, the breakdown, the financing breakdown is going to be pretty much as follows. So if we put 10% into that deal, right, that's $100,000, and then we're borrowing $900,000. Now what I need to say about the borrowing is there are going to be closing costs. So actually, we usually estimate the closing costs at 4 to 5% of the loan. I'd love it to be as low as possible, but the SBA has guarantee fees, the bank has loan costs. So at this point, we're just kind of estimating that at 4 to 5%. If it ends up being quite a bit less than that, then all the better. Now, one point that I have to make is in our 10%, I have to put up, so in addition to the 100,000 in that example, the 100,000 of the million, I have to put up 10% of the closing costs as well. So I'm going to have to put up another, in the case of the 900,000, if we assume that closing costs are say 4.5%, that ends up being $40,500. Let me check my math here. That's 900,000 times 0.045. So that's $40,500 that I'm adding to the loan. So I'm actually borrowing $940,500. And then I also got to come up with an extra $4,500 on the down payment. But on the debt, so I'm borrowing $940,500. The interest rate is usually the prime rate plus 2%. Now right now it's pretty high. I think, I could be wrong, but I think the prime rate is 8.25%. So borrowing costs are really high right now. So that could throw off how I think about coverage ratios, only because we're likely to see rates come down somewhat over the next 3 years. So I might be willing to accept a lower coverage ratio. And the reason is these loans are variable. So as rates change, as market rates change, of course it works both ways. But if rates are high and market rates come down, your rate on your loan will come down, and your payment will come down. So I might think differently about that 1.5 times coverage ratio when rates are high. So to get back to our example, if we're borrowing $940,500, we're borrowing that over 10 years, and we're borrowing that at 10.25%. My yearly debt service, if you run that through a financial calculator like this, or you use a spreadsheet, whatever you use, your yearly debt service is going to be about $150,000. So to calculate the coverage ratio, I'm taking the 200,000, all right, and I'm dividing that by the 150. And that gives me a coverage ratio of about 1.33x. Now, Normally, I would be a little uncomfortable with that. It's tight because I like to see 1.5 times on my coverage ratio, but rates being what they are, I might be okay with that. And banks are usually, they want to usually see a minimum of 1.25% coverage. So they're probably going to be okay with that. Now, what I really want to do is hone in on the cash flow figure itself and kind of reassess how comfortable I am, because that's going to be the most important variable when we buy a business, and there are going to be other questions involved from an operating side, which we'll talk about later. But for now, we just want to talk about cash flow relative to debt service and what we should look for at this point in our analysis. So we'll end there. Thank you for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you next time.